We resume our study in the Gospel of Matthew. In this portion, we are going to be looking at Matthew chapter 8 and verses 28 and 29. And I'm going to be reading out of the New King James Version. And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gerasenes, there met him two demon-possessed men, coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" The church in any era and any place will be impacted by the culture it is in. This is not necessarily a problem. The problem is that people in the church can be blind to how they are shaped by their culture and see that culture through that cultural prism. Let us offer one example. Is it by accident that the church denominations born in the United States often have a focus on democratic institutions within their church governance? In the book of Acts, is it any surprise that the early church had struggles on issues of how Jewish the church would be? The issue is not whether the church reflects the culture it is in. The reality is that if the church is to be the church in a particular place, it in some way, shape, or form must fit into that culture. Now, we're not saying it has to be wholly cultural, but must begin to feel like it is a part of that culture. The problem is never whether the church will be reflective of the culture it is in. A great historical example is found in the work of Anselm of Canterbury. His dates are from 1033 to 1109. This theologian and philosopher gave to us a view of the atonement that was shaped by the cultural era that he was in particular medieval European notions of honor. Now, if not to push too far, that understanding of atonement helps to deepen and further our understanding of the Christian notion of the atonement and what God was achieving in Christ. The great debates of the early church over the nature of Christ and the doctrines of the Trinity were shaped by Greek philosophical terminology. For anyone who has ever done any beginning studies in divinity, they may find themselves at times overwhelmed by some of the nuances of terminology and the particularities of how words and ideas are used. They also might be kind of amused and chuckle over some of the antics of the early church fathers that kind of had a little bit over some of the professional wrestlers that are out there in terms of their fights. Culture is not necessarily good or bad. In the modern Western world, we approach the Christian faith from a materialist point of view. On a popular level, you will see that in some songs that describe heaven. We end up with a very materialist view of heaven that kind of reflects values and priorities here. On a more formal level, you see this in the realm of the demonic. You see, in a radical materialist vision, there is no room for spiritual entities. When we read a passage like Matthew chapter 8, verses 28 and 29, we do so through the materialism of our culture. We see a couple of lunatics who possibly could have benefited from some antipsychotic drugs and some intensive anger management therapy. Now, to say that there are spiritual entities out there and some of them are malevolent does not mean we have to see a devil behind every door. We can make Jesus' ministry banal, though, if we do not appreciate the forces he was against. I think we tend to focus on how marvelous his teaching was or some of the amazing miracles, but I do wonder if that some people in his day and age were attracted to him because Jesus had actual power over the demonic. It is not just the demonic in these men recognized who they were dealing with in Jesus. It was also they recognized that they were defeated. Jesus did not go around wondering if he had power to confront and expel the demonic. He knew he had the authority and he knew the outcome. In the life of the church and the life of the faith, we need to see that there is a dimension that is real and spiritual. Think of the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12. I read it here in the NIV. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. There is a war going on, and we will not win it with the materialist Christianity of the Western world. In Christ, we have the victory and authority over the powers of the demonic.